Welcome to the Same Day Podcast, where we discuss driving incremental business growth and other topics related to real estate, property management, and entrepreneurship. Now to the show at hand.
Matt Zalk here. I'm the host of the Same Day Podcast, where I connect with top business experts and real estate leaders. Past guests on our pod include Brooke Reuter talking about contract for deed versus lease to own options, Scott Reeves of Chickasaw Community Bank talking about commercial banking options. And I recently spoke with Will Gilbrecht of Franklin Heating and Air in Northwest Arkansas about all things heating and air, including why home warranty companies are not great for homeowners, investment property owners, or the tenants that they aim to serve. Today's episode is brought to you by Chris Lyle State Farm. Chris Lyle State Farm helps you protect your most precious assets and investments, whether it's your home and auto, investment rental properties, or other valuables. Call Chris Lyle's State Farm for a quick and painless phone call to potentially save double digits on all your insurance needs. Visit diallyle.com or call his office at 918-878-7771. Today's episode is also brought to you by Keyrenter Property Management. At Keyrenter, we are a full-service property management company helping our clients buy, renovate, and operate real estate assets. We help our clients build wealth while taking the headache out of property management. Michael, you know this as well or better than anybody else. You're familiar with the importance of relationships in our industry. Imagine it's the middle of summer and the electricity goes out at a rental property for some unknown reason, but it shuts down the AC unit. There probably isn't a worse scenario or situation for that sort of maintenance issue to arrive. But it's important to have relationships that allow you as a property owner or management company to get somebody out ASAP to solve that issue. In this case, getting the air conditioning back on when it's 105 degrees outside. It's not easy, but it's how we built our business and our reputation through reliable, trustworthy, and responsive vendors like Michael at Light It Up, who I'm going to introduce in just 1 second. But that is why no matter what rental you have, a single family home, condo, townhome, apartment, we've got the management solutions that you need. Go to keyrenterpmc.com or email us at info@keyrenterpmc.com. I didn't realize this until very recently when Michael told me, but a big shout out to Seth Rice, who's our staff general contractor, a guy that needs to come on the podcast and talk about the deep renovations that he's doing on about 110 properties a year, which is pretty crazy to say. But we got connected because I guess Seth's wife, Amy, was at a Pilates class with Ebony, one of our clients who's married to Marlon, and Ebony and Marlon are friends with Michael and his wife. So good friends and good clients and good vendors all hang out together, which is how we know Michael. And we've been doing, I looked back and I saw that our the first vendor payment that we made to you, Michael, was like in September of 21. So we're going on a couple of years working together, and it's been a great partnership that we have for the last little bit. Let me introduce Michael McDonnell with Light It Up Electric. Michael's a hardworking man that got kicked out of Colorado during the COVID-19 lockdowns. He hails from the working class town of Aspen. Oh yeah, very working class town, and most recently lived in nearby Pitkin County, the Pitkin County town of Basalt. There are fewer Louis Vuitton stores in Basalt than there are in Aspen, but we'll leave that aside for the time being. The best thing he ever did was move his beautiful wife, a high school sweetheart of 15 years, to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're happy that you're here, Michael. Thanks for being on the pod.
Yes, sir. Happy to be here.
Let's go back to your professional beginning. So you're a contractor, an electrician contractor by trade. How did you get started working in electrical?
I started when I was 19 out in Aspen, Colorado. Just had a lot of buddies. We were all chefs working out there, and we decided we wanted nights and weekends off. So about 4 of us changed over to doing electric and been doing it ever since. I started my own company out in Colorado, also Light It Up Electric, about 6 years ago. So I've been running my own show for about 6 years.
If I look at your the number of work orders that you're closing out on a weekly basis, it doesn't seem like you've gotten your nights and weekends back. Are you scaling your team?
It's a lot easier to work nights and weekends when you're working for yourself.
That's true. Being a cook or a chef is an age-old tale. It's fraught with stress, anxiety, the need for perfection, and along with that comes a lot of nicotine and illicit drugs. So we're happy that you're back in the world of electricity. I want to talk. So many of our owners will get a bill. They'll get a notification that something is wrong with the electrical, and it could be lights flickering. It could be lights out. It could be whole house electricity issues. Of course, we'll go to the website for the local electricity company and make sure it's not a full power outage before sending somebody, of course, but they will get a notification that something is wrong with the electrical. Then they might get a phone call for approval. They might get a bill at the end, and they might not know really what's going on in terms of electrical systems in a house and why things can go wrong. Can we talk for a moment about the nomenclature so our owners and our property managers can understand kind of how a house is wired, what the major components are, and then we can get into, diagnoses of different issues that we face?
Absolutely. Yeah. It basically comes in from the power company out here, typically PSO, through an overhead or underground service into your meter. And that's where you basically start getting charged for the service. Past the meter, it goes into the panel, which is basically the nervous system of the whole electrical system of the house. That's where all your breakers are, or your fuses if it's an older house. And if it's fuses, that needs to be replaced as soon as possible, because that's going to cause a lot more service calls and they're harder to find. But from the panel,
real quick, are those bus fuses, or are there other types of fuses?
There's Edison fuses in a lot of these houses out in Oklahoma where they screw in just like a light bulb. It's a light bulb base, and then it's either a 10, 20, 30 amp fuse. But when those blow, you can't reset them.
And one of the challenges with those that I've seen we had one apartment complex that had those, but you can basically put a 30 amp fuse into what should be a 10 amp.
Absolutely.
Spot,
and that's what everybody does.
Right. So you stop it from tripping by just bumping up the amperage of the fuse, which can be a fire hazard in general, right?
Exactly. Especially in those older houses, typically it's aluminum wire. So then you're also putting more resistance, more heat, everything onto that wire. And that's when you start having devices and stuff like that melt.
Right. So changing out a breaker in a panel that has breakers is way more complicated and less likely to be done by a tenant than a fuse, for example.
Exactly.
That can just be screwed in. They can order them on Amazon and screw them in. So
with those fuses, you don't even need to take the cover off. You can just open up the door, unscrew them, screw them in. So you don't even need a tool.
Right. Okay. So you go from the breaker panel or the fuse box
out to your individual circuits. And if it's an older house, typically what the problem is that it's been worked on so many times that they're just spider webbing off of 4 or 5 circuits. And now 2023, you got air fryers, you got fancy coffee makers, tea kettles, you got 50 different new appliances that these houses weren't built to withstand. So when everybody's plugging it in, sometimes it'll be in the back bedroom, and then it's popping, the microwave goes and it kills all the outlets through the house. And that's basically why it's more expensive when I come in, if I am fixing something because of my license and because of my insurance. When I open something, I have to bring that box up to code. I have to bring whatever I touch up to code and make it the right way. So I'm not back out there the next week and just charging the client again and again and again.
So you're saying that it could spiderweb off. So you could have a circuit that comes to the kitchen, and at some place in the attic, somebody might have just peeled back and attached some wire and run it into a back bedroom because that was the easiest fix at the time, or maybe they were not licensed in electrical, and therefore they ran another thing back there. They put it into a plug, and now the plug for the fan that they're running or for their hair dryer is not working because they blew a fuse they blew a breaker that is really tied to a kitchen circuit.
But then you do that over the course of 40 years and 10 or 12 different families living in that house. So then the next guy goes up, oh, look there's an easy splice right there. I'm just going to tie onto that too. And the next guy and the next guy. And now everybody's tied onto the same circuit. And it's also the new nice accessible outlet. So everybody wants to plug in to that new outlet. So then all through the house, you got 5 new outlets. They're all on one circuit, but people don't realize, well, I'm in the back bedroom, but it's also killing power in the living room. And that's due to work done by not a professional, basically.
Got it. And then the solution to that is actually bringing that circuit from the bedroom back on, or that receptacle from the bedroom back onto the circuit for the bedroom,
or just pull
tied
it
back into the original breaker.
Yeah, and now what I typically like to do, and this is where we have to start getting approvals, is pull a dedicated circuit, especially if a family is using a space heater in every room. And space heaters are our worst enemy, a homeowner's worst enemy and electrician's worst enemy, because they just overload the circuit, especially with aluminum wire. It melts that wire. The radiant space heaters are the best ones to use. Just typically, if it's a house with not a very good heating system and the homeowner is trying to nip it in the butt, I would suggest leaving a couple radiant space heaters in those homes just for people to plug in because they don't overheat too much and they don't put the strain on the outlet and melt the wires.
And they also happen to work super well. I mean, they just whatever it is, they heat oil and that oil radiates throughout, the immediate space. And so it works much better. Why is it though that I guess it's just the coils in an electric space heater, the coils are just constant resistant. They're resisting each other from two sides. And so they create the heat that way, but it's just a direct burn of electric.
And right at the end, it's actually the hot and neutral are connected at the very end with the end line resistor. So that's what actually makes the heat, is it's actually touching the hot and neutral together at the end of that resistor and causing friction and heat. And then that also vibrates a lot, especially if they have a blower on it. And that shakes the plug in the outlet. And basically how a connection works, all the electricity runs on the outside of the metal or the copper. But when you're plugging in that metal from the cord, then it's jumping from the copper inserts in there, just like a little lightning storm. And that's how it gets the power. So if the plug is a little bit loose and it's barely not touching, that's going to cause where you get the corrosion, because it's just basically bouncing back and forth. With an electrical arc is the hottest thing known to man. It's 4.5 times hotter than the sun. So, I mean, there's actually no way to judge how hot it is, but it's the hottest thing we've ever known of. So, I mean, when you have that going on in your wall, it makes sense why everything starts to melt if you think about it,
Yeah.
So having new plugs, a lot of times, especially if these old plugs have been painted 50 years, you know what I mean? And then it's so loose in there and you're plugging in something different every time. And then the paint wears away. Then you're just having a little lightning storm in there all the time. And it's just a matter of time before it starts to overheat.
Right. So then you go to you come off of your line from the breaker panel to a receptacle. A receptacle can be GFCI or non-GFCI. What's the difference and why does it matter where they are in a house?
So the GFCI, that came out in the 70s. And when it did come out, it eliminated, I think, 89% of electrical deaths. Basically, it was so you can't drop a toaster in a tub or a hairdryer in a tub. It'll kill it. What it stands for is ground fault circuit interrupter. So it's GFCI really, but we just call them GFIs. And that's basically if the hot touches the ground or neutral, even for a second, it kills the power right there at the device. So it works as a breaker basically right at the device, but with one specific protection. So it doesn't really pop if it gets overloaded at 20 amps. It's just that if it touches the hot or neutral touches if the hot touches the neutral or ground, then it immediately cuts it.
Would a GFCI naturally trip if you put an electric space heater into a GFCI? If the hot and neutral?
No, because the load, the end line resistor causes that to not happen. That's why it actually has just a coil on the end.
Got it.
And honestly, it's the electrical theory. So there's a lot of things that are people's best guess on how and why, but it is the electrical theory. So people still all over the world, we haven't hammered it down how it exactly works. We know how to control it. You know what I mean?
Okay, so GFCIs should be placed, according to code in Oklahoma, GFCIs should be placed within how many feet of
within 6 feet, within 6 feet of any sink or water source or anywhere outdoor or garage, because they assume you plug an extension cord in the garage and then it goes outside.
Got it.
So basically anywhere that it can get wet or damp.
Okay, and as long as we're talking about code, if we're putting in new receptacles for a new build or we're renovating a house and it needs to be up to code, like imagine we're redoing all of the Romex in a house right now, how frequently do outlets have to be positioned in a room?
From the corner, they have to be 6 feet out. And then from there, if it's just a long straight wall, every 12 feet. But if you're at a corner, you have to go 6 feet. You can't count an outlet and then around and go 10 feet from one corner and 2 feet from it on the other.
Okay, and what's the logic? In old times, if you're in a 1940s build, you've got one outlet in a room potentially. What's the logic of having that many outlets in a single room?
For vacuuming is honestly what it says in the code book. It's for vacuuming a house. And so you can consistently have one plugged in wherever you need.
Wow, but why would you need one every 6 feet or 12 feet in one room?
That's it. It's on for convenience. It's called convenience outlets. And in the hallway, again, for vacuuming, it says if it's over 10 feet, you need an outlet in the hallway. And if any wall's over 2 feet long, so like by a door, if it's over 2 feet, you need an outlet on that wall too.
Got it. I always thought it was because if you only had one outlet, then you'd put an extension strip in one of those things, and then you're plugging in 10 different things into that extension strip, and that is causing more of a load to pull on that specific receptacle than is really rated for fire code or whatever.
Yeah, they basically in the book they explain it as convenience, so you're not getting tripped up over the cord when you're vacuuming.
Got it. Got it.
They reference vacuuming a lot and Christmas lights a lot in the code book. Yeah,
but
really
Christmas lights today don't draw that much power. They're all LED.
Yeah, but that you need like on a patio, you need a outlet outside, even on a second story patio for Christmas lights.
Right.
And you need in eaves now on new houses. You need an outlet, at least one on each corner for Christmas lights. You need, I mean, it's weird.
Let's talk for a second about the types of wiring that could be in a house. If it was built in, we've done a ton of renovations. I mean, I have specifically seen a ton of overseen a ton of renovations prior to Seth being involved. And now he does all of them. But we used to see knob and tube. I guess we've seen, I don't want to say copper, aluminum, Romex. What are the different types of wires that we see in a house that power the electrical system? And when were the periods that we might find them from when we're doing a renovation?
So knob and tube is the oldest that I've seen. And I think it is one of the first that was ever in houses. And I think that's from like the 30s and 40s.
Got it.
And it's basically just two exposed wires, your hot and neutral, that run about a foot apart through ceramic little knobs, basically, that have little fiberglass tubes, I believe they were.
Mm-hmm.
But the power is just running open across the studs on your attic. And then the two wires drop down the wall, exposed, no copper or no conduit or anything, and just hit the outlets. There's no ground, no nothing. You can't tell the difference between the hot and neutral.
So if you were to walk up into an attic and touch that, would you get shocked?
Oh yeah, if you touch them both, you can touch one of them. You can touch the hot if you're not grounded all the time and not get shocked and electricity is just flowing through you. But then if you find a place for it to ground, then it's going to exit you, and that's where you get hurt.
But essentially, if you're in an attic and you touch the hot, you're grounded because you're standing on a stud. Unless you're
you're not right? Grounded because the wood isn't grounded.
Okay, got it. Interesting.
But if you cross like this and you get both wires on your arm, then you'll get shocked just right here. Or if you touch the hot with your right hand and the neutral with your left hand, then it goes through your heart, and that's where it can be real dangerous.
Got it.
So it's better to shock yourself on one side of your body so it doesn't cross across your heart.
Interesting. Scary. And let's talk then. What was the next iteration? It was copper after that?
No, aluminum was after that. And that's probably through the 50s and 60s. That's where you see a lot of those old Federal Pacific and Zinsco panels that we always try and get rid of as well. Because those are, during that time in the 50s, 60s, when the big boom happened out here or all across America, and they were just putting up so many houses, the Zinsco and Federal Pacific panels were the first magnetic trip breakers, which are basically what we use today still.
Mm-hmm.
And they got put in millions and millions of homes for about 8 years, maybe 9 years through the late 50s, early 60s. And then they got their UL listing taken away because the breakers don't trip. So they're basically, in the electrical business, we call them welders, because you can sit there and try and trip it out and it'll just melt your copper wire down until there's nothing left. So that's why all the time, if the homeowners see, anytime I see one of those panels, I usually put a quote together and don't tell them. I don't like to freak because, obviously these panels have been in there for 50 years. It hasn't caught fire. It's a good chance it won't. But also there's, no UL listing. Those breakers are about $150 a piece because of that. So it's just a money pit in the long run for that also. Yeah.
When we do inspections, the inspector will always recommend replacing a Zinsco panel.
Mm-hmm. Literally the inspector recommends replacing those over the Edison fuse panels because the Edison fuse panels are safer.
Wow. Amazing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then it went from, what did you say? Aluminum to copper.
The copper wire. Yep. And then but it also, the Romex changed a little bit because when it went to copper, it had cloth wire or cloth shielding in there. And now we got like basically cardboard paper, and then the Romex, which is a type of rubber, I believe, rubber or plastic.
And so Romex we know as the yellow lines generally. Does Romex come in a bunch of different colors, or is it just always yellow?
The yellow is 20 amp, 12 gauge. The white is number 15, usually, or I'm sorry, number 14 gauge, usually good for 15 amps. The orange stuff is 10 gauge, usually good for 30 amps. And then black is where you start getting number 8, number 6. And that's where it gets bigger.
Just wider gauges, bigger gauges, and then you can flow more electricity through those.
Yeah, exactly. The lower the number is, the bigger the wire.
So from a panel, oftentimes our owners will get a quote to on a renovation to upgrade a panel from whatever's there from the 50s, 100 amps to 200 amps. Why would an owner want to upgrade the panel on their home, the main electrical panel?
Number one, for safety, because it is those panels are the only ones that really new panels don't burn down houses, basically. You know what I mean? New panels, the biggest nuisance you have is if a breaker trips a bunch, they're made to just trip easy because it's time to replace it.
Right.
And then with the old panels, the second thing is cost. Every time one of those breakers goes out, my cost of a breaker is about $150. Plus, I got a guy going out there. So right there, going out there to replace a 20 amp breaker that would cost, service and everything included, about $100. Now it's costing about $250, $300.
Yeah.
And then if you get a 240 volt breaker, they're about $250 a piece. And then, you know what I mean? It just keeps going up from there.
Yeah, let's talk for a second about the arc fault interrupters. Those things.
Well, one last thing on that, the panel too. A lot of times, why it's a little bit more. All these panels are in the closets, and the closets are the worst place. It's actually illegal to put panels in the closet anymore. So when I do replace those panels, I also have to move it to the outside, which cut a little bit more wire, a little bit more everything, and that's just to bring it up to code and to make it safer. And that's the ultimate best perk of that, because nobody likes having me go in there, move all their clothes, and have to work in their closet. It's a lot better if it's outside, just for multiple reasons.
Why is it illegal to put it in the closet now?
For fire. No, for fire hazard. Well, yeah, clearance. You're supposed to have a 3-foot clearance around your panel and in front, but also you can't even have incandescent lights in the closet because of fire. So the fact that they used to put the biggest heat box and where everything comes back to in the closet is just kind of crazy, because you have linen, you got the most flammable stuff in your house hanging in there.
Right. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Arc fault interrupters. Those things are super annoying, super expensive.
Yeah.
What's the story with those?
So luckily for Oklahoma right now, we're still on the 2017 code. So it's going to get worse because right now in Colorado, as soon as the code came out, we had to follow it. So out there, every single opening, we call it outlet, but it's not like what you plug into, but every single opening that's 20 amps or less has to be arc fault protected. But out here, we're still on 2017. So it's all bedrooms, the kitchen, and lighting throughout the house. So you probably got about, in a brand new house, like 2,000 square foot, you'll probably have 5 circuits that are arc faulted. And again, each of those breakers are about $150, $175, and they trip. They're called AFCI, just like the GFCI. It's arc fault circuit interrupter. So that takes it one more step to where the grounds and neutrals can't even touch each other. Because the way that the new code works also, the grounds and neutrals have to be bonded only at the first place of disconnect. So that's out right by the meter.
Okay.
And now in the panels, you have to lift the neutrals up off of the panel and only have the grounds grounded to the metal going outside. The neutrals are on their own separate insulated bus bar. So now basically the arc faults are doing what the GFCIs do, only if a ground and neutral barely touch in that box, it's going to trip the whole circuit. And I honestly have no idea. What we joke around about is the people that make all these laws for NEC just get drunk together and hang out and say, all right, well, they're in with Siemens and Square D. And they're like, well, our guys, we got to keep making them money. So what else can we come out with? So
you don't think the arc fault circuit interrupter adds a great deal of protection?
No, I would
certainly adds a great deal of annoyance.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say for bedrooms, if it was only in bedrooms, I could understand that, because if it's easy, people are a lot more careless while they're sleeping. And, you hear a bunch of weird stories about in other countries, people getting shocked by their phones and stuff like that. But no, I haven't seen what they do besides annoy everybody, from me to the owner to everybody.
The way it's annoying is that if you run all the electrical in your studs, like properly mounted to the studs and real tight and nice, the way a professional electrician would do it, then it's relatively unlikely that you're going to, when you're sheetrocking over that electricity to cover your wall in, that you're going to put a screw through that and you're going to put a screw incorrectly and nick the wire. But that nick in a wire, if it happens, causes that arc fault circuit interrupter to pop on a more frequent basis for some reason.
Exactly.
Why is that? Why is that happening?
That's because in the wire, the ground isn't insulated. So if that screw goes through and it barely nicks the neutral and then it's touching that ground, that's causing it to trip every time. Or if it's in there and it's touching anything else, because also now in new houses, every piece of metal is grounded. So from the copper pipes, water pipes, the what do they call it? The rebar and the forms,
Yeah.
So if it goes through and it's touching a staple that could be in there, it could just have a little bit of ground on it somehow through the stud because the stud's touching something. And it just, the arc faults are the most annoying thing. And once they trip 2 or 3 times, then they probably got to be replaced because anytime you plug them in, they can only hold about 4 or 5 amps at that point.
What's the solution to that if it just keeps tripping?
Honestly, I take them out, especially on rental properties and it's good wiring in the house. I'll take them out and put a normal breaker in there, and that saves the homeowner money. And that is a judgment call. Technically, am I supposed to do that? Not by code, but the inspectors are okay with it. Everybody I've ever talked to is okay with it, and it saves. At the bottom line is it's saving the homeowner money, and it's not removing any protection.
Right. Let's talk for a second. You mentioned that the electrical comes into the panel or to an overhead service or via underground from the electrical provider's lines in the back of the house or wherever. Why would a homeowner of a rental property or even their own property want to transition their power from overhead to an underground service?
It's not up to them. It depends on where they live and what the PSO is providing.
Got it. So PSO will determine, or your electrical provider will determine whether you're going overhead or underhead?
Yep, exactly. I'm sure if you're building a new property out on a new piece of land, you might have some say in it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, typically, I think I see that they are doing a lot more underground with the newer homes because for obvious reasons, weather, all sorts of stuff, it's just better. But yeah, if you're in like downtown or the north side or somewhere where there's already houses established and it is overhead, they're just going to give you overhead.
Got it. Is there any danger of those lines coming into the house? I mean, if you touch them, do they shock you? Like what?
No, that's why they braid, because the ground wire, the steel cable that comes across is completely exposed. And then they braid those other wires around it. So if it does, like sometimes if it's, 50, 60 years old and it's been getting real hot out, I go up there and I bend it and I can see some exposed in there, but they have it set up to where that's where sometimes you'll see the overhead line catch on fire and then melt back until it blows a transformer, because that's where a little bit got exposed. But they run it to where when that does catch on fire and it melts all that, that's actually PSO's way of like the breaker tripping.
Got it. Interesting. Let's talk about let's talk first about the difference between having a novice electrician or somebody that is a licensed electrician but not a contractor doing work on your house, and a contractor that's a little bit more experienced. What's the difference in terms of pricing, in terms of overall cost, if you factor in pricing times hours? What do you see in that?
I would see that a guy that if it's, my cousin's buddy type of guy, that is an electrician or whatever, he's going to come in, he's already feeling pressure that he's got to keep it under a certain amount, and he's trying to make his money. So he's just going to try and go in there, get it done as fast as he can, make it work. And nobody gets up in the attic and checks his work. Nobody's going to, and he knows that. So as long as he can make this work the way he knows how to make it work, then it's good. But a lot of people don't learn the right way. And a lot of people haven't learned. They're electrician, but all they've ever done is go into these old houses and make stuff work. They've never actually wired a house. They've never actually gone in and see how it should be ran and the common sense of, safety in electrical. Because it's mainly common sense. And just a lot of people that are plumber or jack of all trades type of guys, they go in there and they just fly through it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'll tell you that it gives me a headache every time I go in there, and I can definitely tell every time I go in there and somebody's already been trying to work on it and then they failed and had to call me. And all I can say to that is just tell me honestly what you did, so then I can fix it faster,
Right.
But with the pricing, I would say with me, we have a price book, and it's kind of like how, like we have a set price for if it's this type of breaker, this size, it's going to be this price. If it's an outlet with aluminum wiring and we got to fix the box, bring it up to code, it'll be this price. And basically I got that from competition out here. such as like I worked for a couple companies. I don't want to say their name, but they did price forward pricing, and I learned how they did it. And I'll say that I'm over 50% less than them, because that was my big stipulation with working when I was working for them when I first got out here, was they do a forced safety inspection when they walk in your house, say, oh, well, this is a fire hazard. This is probably going to burn down. And they just scare the hell out of the homeowner. And say you call them for an outlet, here's $125, but it goes all the way to $35,000. And this is what they're pushing you on. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah.
So I found I like the business plan of, hey, this is how much it costs. And you go over the pricing before you do the work. So we come to an agreement, like on the approvals and all that. And then I do the work. And if they want to see anything, I'm transparent with everything, as you know. I'll show anybody everything.
Yeah.
And it's just a fairer way to price it, I feel, because otherwise I'm coming in there. Nobody likes to be charged $120 an hour. And especially with rental houses where the homeowner's not there, so they don't get to see what I'm doing. I take a lot of pictures and I do trace my steps. I do a real good job with that. But I also understand if I was in California and I get a bill and it was $125 an hour, it's, I want to see more details and it's more questions, as opposed to, okay, here's a breakdown, each line item, and a good description and pictures. I feel like that just is more friendly, more, I would prefer that. So that's how I do it.
Right. I would imagine that since September of 2021, you've probably done, I don't know, 300, 400 work orders. I didn't pull those numbers.
Yeah, I've
done a lot. What are the most common issues that you're seeing in rental homes that we manage?
The most common thing there's winter and summertime ones, but during, like right now for the past month and a half, is space heaters melting, aluminum wires. And the big thing with how they used to wire houses, and maybe it's just how I was trained, but we don't wrap our wires through the device. We pigtail, we use wire nuts, and say there's 3 different wires coming into one box. We get wire nuts and like little foot-long leads of a black wire for the hot, a white wire for the neutral, and a copper wire for the ground. Twist them all together, like twist all the blacks together with our pliers, put a wire nut on it, twist all the neutrals together with our pliers, put a wire nut on it, do the same with the ground, fold them in the box real nice so everything's out of the way. You don't have a chance of something touching something, tripping, even if it's an arc fault breaker.
Right.
And that's why we do it this way, because this is how basically we had to, wiring new multi-million-dollar homes in Aspen, so we didn't have to come back and do 100 service calls to try and figure it out. Then we wrap the outlet with some tape and put it in there. And what this does, now all the heat, say you have a space heater running down the line and you got 10 outlets before it. If there's one loose neutral in one of these outlets before, it's going to be the one that melts, even though you're plugged in 4 more outlets down.
Right.
And that's, again, because of that little lightning storm that happens. If it's a little bit loose, especially the neutral, because that's where all the power comes back to escape. So when it comes back, it's just arcing out. If it's aluminum, that's what oxidizes on steel. So that just makes it 10 times worse. So space heaters are the worst enemy, but then it comes down to old wiring and outlets being made up either backstabbed, where they just go into the back, not even wrapped around the screw, because they've been in there for 30 years. And again, heat and, heats up, cools down, gets bigger and smaller.
Sure.
And now that wire is floating in there. So you plug something in and it has to do a little lightning storm in there to make the power. And so once you open that up, the house has been remodeled. This outlet's been changed countless times. So now I got this much wire. It's all bare aluminum going up there. So now I have to pull new wire into it. I have to, but typically it is over usage. And that's when I try and start pulling new circuits, especially if I go in and I see like the washer is on with the microwave, another countertop circuit, this and that. And I see that is when I'll also put those optional line items on some of my quotes and say, hey, I found this. You don't have to fix it right now. That's not why you called me out. But I do think it'll be a future problem. And then I give them the option at least to nip it in the butt, But I always understand if people can't do it, because I get it. It's not cheap. Copper wire is expensive. Right. And I do suggest if anybody can always call me directly, especially homeowners. And I tell all the property managers that, if anybody wants to go over detailed of what it is. But also, next time anybody's in Lowe's or Home Depot, just walk down the electrical aisle and look how expensive copper wire is right now. And you'll have a little bit more of an idea at least.
is if tenants are putting 3 or 4 high-powered, high-draw kitchen appliances into one circuit and it continuously trips, and they call us and say their outlets are always out and they're always having issues, what can we do to prevent them from doing that? I mean, how do we teach them how to
So what I do
that?
with that is, because by code, each kitchen is supposed to have 2 dedicated countertop circuits on top of, like, a dedicated for your fridge, dedicated for your microwave, and then dedicated for your dishwasher disposal. So technically you should have about 5 or 6 dedicated 20 amp circuits in your kitchen.
Yeah.
And as we all know, in these older houses, there's about 4 or 5 dedicated circuits in the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's where typically, luckily the houses are a little bit small. So that's where we can get away with like add a circuit for $350 to $400 and then get a dedicated circuit right there in the kitchen where I tell them, okay, this is where you plug in your air fryer. And that is what I do a lot with these tenants, is I show them where I identify their circuits for them. And this is the stuff that I don't charge for. And sometimes I will put a note on there explaining, hey, did this, this, and this. But I do spend a lot of time with the tenants explaining these space heaters are your worst enemy. You got to understand this, and you got to plug them in here, here, and here. And then I've even gone through and label which outlets are okay for them to plug those in. And I only install also 20 amp industrial outlets when I'm out there. So all these other ones in a typical house, even though they're on a 20 amp circuit, it's a 15 amp outlet. And people don't realize that either. And that's just the builders being cheap from the get-go. Or in these old houses, it is what it is, you know?
Should we be putting in an addendum to a lease and explaining to tenants that they really should not be using electrical space heaters, but rather radiant space heaters? With that, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
basically,
I think so.
If a tenant, goes against our guidance and does it anyways, puts an electric space heater in, trips a breaker, sees that they, have done something wrong, they hide the electric breaker space heater, and then they call us for a no service call. I'm like, how do we prove that? How do we start getting into a he said, she said battle? It can be challenging. So I'm a little bit reluctant to put in unenforceable lease clauses because of stuff like that. But maybe it's something we should be providing in terms of guidance. Like, you're going to cause electrical issues at your house if you do this.
That's what I suggest. Because you can tell what houses are going to be a little too cold in the winter. If it has an older system, excuse me. Then maybe tell the homeowner, hey, we got to have 2 radiant space heaters available at this house, and then explain to the tenants, you can only use these ones. This is just for your safety, for yada, yada, yada. And a lot of times I do see with most of the tenants, if you bring up, hey, this is a safety thing for you, everybody's scared of electric. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you explain to them that this is the way that you got to do it and it's safe and we're providing these for you, then I think that would eliminate. And I know it's kind of, then you're doing a little bit of an extra service, but you're also saving money in the long run, you know?
Right. Interesting.
And really, at least out here in Oklahoma, you only need those space heaters for 6 weeks or so. You know what I mean? It's not terrible.
Yeah. Okay. So that was winter service calls. What are you getting? Other months, summertime
is those AC breakers overheating and melting. Because a lot of times what they got in these older panels, they're putting in whatever breaker fits. Because say you got like a Siemens panel, will take a Eaton breaker or a Square D breaker, but they're just slightly not the right size. The copper bus is a little bit skinnier, so then it's not making a good connection. And then when you got all the ACs running, and the summers are way harder out here, as everybody knows.
Right.
Those are overheating. A lot of times they had somebody else do it that wasn't an electrician. So they got 10 gauge wire running a 50 amp AC. So then the wire is melting, Or a lot of times what I see is a house that you could tell didn't have an AC from the get-go, and the previous homeowner, whoever added it, and it's just tapped in from the meter. So then that basically what it is, that AC has constant power, no way to shut it off. So anytime somebody comes out to work on it, they're disconnecting, reconnecting hot. And so that's burning up the panel board, all up in the AC, also causing too much heat. So the ACs are the number one service call out here during the summer.
And the solution to that being directly connected into the panel is that you need to have a disconnect right by the AC.
Exactly. A disconnect right there. Also, those old Zinsco and Federal Pacific panels are not the best to be running ACs because, again, they never trip. So then they put strain on the AC. And I hate the most when we go out there and it's, half us, half AC, and then we got to sit there because that makes it hard for the homeowner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because then we're coming out, okay, we got our part ready. Now the HVAC guys got to come, and then I got to come back. And I hope they understand that is just how it has to work. There's parts that they can get that we can't. There's parts that I can get that they can't.
Right.
And then there's also steps that have to happen before he can work. And then I have to come to finish it. It's just,
right.
It's one of those deals. And that's why I do strongly suggest, like you said, just putting in a good HVAC system is key out here just because of the ice in the winter and the extreme heat in the summer.
Are there any changes that we need to make as legislation comes from the West towards heat pumps and getting rid of gas? I call it the 20, 30, 40-year horizon. I mean, is there a way to ensure, I guess those heat pumps are more efficient, but they're still now using electricity, which is more expensive than gas. It draws more amperage and power through the system. Anything that owners of property that are thinking a few years down the road should be considering?
I would minimum at least have 100 amp service on your house.
Yeah.
And be prepared for that. And think about here in about a year or two, Tulsa is going to go on to the 2020 code. And then anytime you do an outdoor meter, you have to put a disconnect. So that's going to almost double the service fee. So right now, typically a new overhead meter and service is like $1,000, $1,100 with that new 100 amp disconnect and everything that you have to add on to it. And then since you're adding a disconnect, then they might make you redo the panel anyways and get it out of the closet.
Got it.
So I would say in the next year or two is a really good time to upgrade your service if you're trying to at least get the proper amount of power on your house, because then it's a lot easier to just go in, hire an electrician, and pull a circuit. Because technically, in Colorado, where I was, if you're pulling a new circuit to the kitchen, you had to pull a permit and get it inspected. So Tulsa's pretty loose on that right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if here soon, with all the new people moving into town, it seems like even in the last year they're cracking down a little bit more.
So in essence, if you want to do a service upgrade or a panel upgrade, do it before the 2020 whatever code comes into effect.
Because then also the arc faults will kick in, everything like that. So you really want to try and get that work done before they make it harder and more expensive for you. Yeah.
If I look at go back and look at the pictures and the notes in your work orders, I often see stuff about open junction boxes and attics. We've seen, we try to use a company called Titan Energy Services that provides PSO paid for, so free to the homeowner energy efficiency services. They'll blow an insulation and they'll like pull on the house to see how much air is coming through different cracks. And then they'll do crack sealing and a bunch of other stuff, but they won't do insulation in the attic if there are open junction boxes or splices in the attic. What does that mean? What's the danger of that? Why won't they spray foam over something that has an open junction box?
So that is going back to the difference in hiring a contractor and licensed electrician. You gotta hire the guy that's going to do it the right way, because if I'm up, I've never done an open splice like that, but even if I forgot to put a cover on a junction box, I go at home and I sleep all night thinking about it, and I got to go back the very first thing in the morning and make it right.
Yeah.
So those guys go home, they got the taillight warranty, where as soon as you don't see their taillights, that's where your warranty ends. Yeah. So it's a big thing, but it's a big fire hazard. It's a good thing they don't spray the insulation over that, because basically all you have is exposed copper. Sometimes I'll go up there and the wires are just twisted together, not even wire nutted, no tape. So it's just anything. And again, it's not, you can touch that without it starting a fire, but if it's a little bit loose and then you got loads going on and off, every time somebody's flipping a switch, that's going to cause a spark. That's going to cause a little arc. Right. And like I said, that arc is the hottest thing we know of. It's hotter than the sun. So if you have a pile of insulation, which insulation isn't supposed to be very flammable, but all the dust, everything that collects in these 50, 60-year-old house attics is very flammable.
Yeah. I guess it's important to note that electricity is a vibration. And so every time it turns on and off, it's vibrating a little bit. And so even if you have, old connections that were potentially properly done, with a million iterations of the vibration, they can come undone. Things can move, and they will naturally move.
And especially with aluminum wire, Now we have this stuff called deox or no-lox that you put on aluminum wire before you put it under steel. And that stops the carbon and stops all the white stuff, the deox, from happening. But they didn't ever have it before. So if you got these aluminum wires twisted together, they also barely used wire nuts way back when. It was common practice to just use electrical tape.
Yeah.
So with that, it vibrates so much, the corrosion actually in there separates the wires, and then the electricity doesn't make connection through all that white powder, you know?
Got it. Interesting. Any other thoughts or considerations that our owners should know about when thinking about general electrical issues in their investment homes?
I would say just think about if you were living there, how safe you would want it for your kids and everything like that. Because there is a lot of these houses that are good deals out here, but they're a good deal for a reason, I think. And just know that I'm always open and available for any questions from any homeowner. And I love going over, and I love people getting multiple quotes too, because then they can see that I really am very fair priced, and I really am, you know, giving people a good deal. And I also offer a year warranty on all my work, as you guys know, obviously. Mm-hmm. But, you know, most of the time, I don't think I've ever really had to honor anything because I don't have to go back, you know? Yep. But if I ever need it to, absolutely, I will.
That's a huge selling point. We have a bunch of institutional investors that come in, and they've recently transitioned a lot of their make-ready or their renovation work to us because they say, and this is intuitively true, when they have one crew do the make-ready, and then that crew, or the renovation, and that crew leaves, and it comes to us to do an inspection, and then photos, and then leasing, and then occupancy, there's a lot of room for what should be warranty work in that process. And they don't know necessarily the quality of the vendor that's doing the work before it gets handed over to us. And so we're often going back to them and we're saying, hey, we can't get this thing marketed because we've got this critical issue that we need to address. Or the house is tenanted, and then we've got a critical issue, and now we have to get back in touch with somebody who's now long gone on to another project. They're not working with Keyrenter. They weren't a Keyrenter sub or vendor, and we have to navigate that process. They don't want to come out. It's a long time for them to come out. So a tenant might be without electricity for a while. Whereas if they use our vendors, they know they're getting a high quality product on the front end. And then they know that if there's something that needs to be warrantied, it will be handled. And oftentimes they just won't know about it. So they don't get the sense or feeling that there's a lot of redundancy in work or whatever else. I mean, you recently worked on a property for Sean Prince, who's been on the pod before, and does a lot of renovation stuff. And, you know, when that renovation completes, he knows he may have paid our general contracting fee, but he also doesn't have any warranty calls. He doesn't have any issues where he's being pulled away from his day job in order to approve something that needs to be done now that should have been done originally. So there's a benefit to just using one company to kind of run through the entirety of the process from renovation through the leasing and occupancy, because you don't have as many headaches on the back end.
Yeah, I just did that service for Sean. He's a great guy.
Yeah, love Sean. Tell our viewers how they can reach out to you if they want to.
Basically, mainly word of mouth. My phone number is 918-724-6996, and it's Lighted Up Electric. And just go ahead and reach out through me. You can always get my number through Matt as well, but I do free quotes. It costs nothing for me to come out, and I give you to the penny amount. And if there's something else that I miss, that's on me, and I eat that cost, you know, because I feel like I'm a very fair guy out here. So
I love that. I appreciate it. Michael McDonnell's a hardworking guy who came to us during the COVID pandemic, the lockdowns. He's originally from Aspen, where he was working on new builds out there and construction out there, where he started his electrical career. But the best thing he ever did was move his beautiful wife, his high school sweetheart of 15 years, to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Michael, we appreciate you being with us and sharing your perspective with our viewers.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you. And always, I appreciate Keyrenter. You got the best property managers out there.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Same Day Podcast. Tune in to a new show each week and be sure to subscribe to get future episodes.